you're not successful unless you listen and you learn and you're patient and you're thoughtful and you learn an appreciation for what other people do and figure out how you can help support them as a leader.
And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Jason Kelly, alongside my partner, Alex Rodriguez. So excited to have Christine Dorfler. She is the CFO and Executive Vice President of the National Football League. Christine, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am such a fan, so excited to be here.
I think the place we want to start is basically with our obsession. We talk about the NFL. I don't think there is an episode that goes by that we don't talk about the NFL in some form or fashion, because it looms so large in the business of sports, in this intersection of business, sports, and culture that we talk about all the time, Christine. So take us inside the business. You know, you've been in this seat for a couple years now. How do you describe the business of the NFL?
Well, you know, it's so fascinating. I've been here for 2 years. I'm just coming up on my 2-year mark at the NFL. But before that, I spent almost 20 years at NBC. So I was in the media and entertainment space. And as you think about the NFL and just the impact it has on fans, on people, on local markets, and on media and entertainment companies. I mean, this is a media and entertainment property, the world's largest, arguably, and just the impact that has, our media partners, the way that content just resonates with fans, the way that fans are so incredibly passionate about it. I mean, that is the business, and it's an honor for me to be in this chair and just to be part of this fantastic league and this fantastic, delivery of content that excites and unites people across the country and hopefully at some point across the globe.
So is it fair to say that because of your work at NBC, like you sort of knew what you were in for, but like what was the thing that surprised you when you actually, when Roger, taps you for this job, Roger Goodell, the commissioner, what's the thing that strikes you most when you sort of first get there, like the first few days?
Well, it's so fascinating because I was on the other side. When my last job at NBC was the CFO of NBC Sports. So I was on the other side of those negotiation for media rights with our various partners, certainly the NFL being the biggest of that. But when I got to the NFL, I mean, I think the thing that surprised me is just how incredibly, the NFL is on the top of its game, but when you look at the work that is happening in the 32 local clubs and everything they're doing day in and day out, as well as at the league office, to grow, to innovate, to think about the future. From the outside looking in, you could say, well, the NFL's on the top of the game. You look at the revenue relative to any other sports league, and it's certainly superior. You look at the viewership relative to other sports leagues, and you could say, geez, it would be so easy to sort of grow complacent and to sort of say, hey, we have a great business model. We have a lot of stability with our media rights locked up for a little while, with the collective bargaining agreement locked up for a little while. But it couldn't be further from what's happening. People here are constantly thinking about what's next and how do we continue to grow? How do we continue to innovate? Whether that's with flag football, whether that's with becoming a global sport property, all of the things, nobody is sitting still. And I love that. I love adrenaline sort of based places and businesses. That was surprising, but not surprising, I guess I would say.
One of the things that's been surprising for me, Christine, is like you are the biggest and the best known around the world. The shield is very, very powerful. But I'm wondering, first of all, I'm fascinated with your background, which we're going to get into, going back to Villanova and the Army and all of that. But 20 years at NBC Sports as CFO, how did that help you shape and position you for this job that you have currently?
Alex, I started at NBC. I was a manager. I was a pretty junior level finance person coming out of the military. And I made my way, fantastic company, and I made my way through all sorts of different jobs. I think that one propelled me to the next, and it was all the sort of twists and turns and the different experiences I had that then landed me at NBC Sports, which, growing up, I loved sports. I played a bunch of sports. I ended up playing lacrosse in college, and so to be in that chair and to be in the sports media business was so exciting for me. But I feel like it was all the different steps along the way and the twists and turns and the jobs that were great and candidly some jobs that were not so great that helped to get me to NBC Sports. And then obviously that was a big part of why I think I'm here. I mean, the media partners are such a substantial part of our revenue. They're such a substantial part of our business, and focusing on strengthening all of our media partners and bringing new ones in, like Netflix this year with the Christmas Day games, was, it's part of what we think about all the time. And so I would say it was all those kind of building blocks along the way that got me ready for that role and ultimately led me here.
It's interesting, Christine, when you think about sort of the portfolio of things that you have in front of you across the business, the NFL, media is one thing. We've talked a bit about that. I can tell you we could do an entire episode just on private equity in the NFL. I know that that's something you are intimately involved in. And just to be clear, to refresh the audience, this is the ability for a select group of private equity firms to own up to 10% of individual NFL franchises. Tell us about that from the league's perspective, because I have to say, I've never really had that conversation with you or with Roger Goodell. I'm interested to see how you think it's working and sort of what the intention was and sort of what you're taking away from it so far.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the first things I was a part of working on, which was incredibly exciting and interesting and just sort of fascinating to see how the league and the owners thought about it. I mean, I would say the league was very thoughtful and intentional in coming up with the construct, and a construct that works for the NFL. It's not the same construct, as you know, that other sports leagues have adopted and had adopted and implemented prior to the NFL. I think, we put together a committee of 5 owners, and the owners worked a long time with staff from the league office to try to figure out what is the right construct, who are the right partners. How many partners should we have? And I think it was really, the 10% works for the NFL. I think there's an element of this that is, crawl, walk, run, and we're in the crawl stage, and we're going to see how it goes. These are passive limited partner investments. You're not going to see any, fund managers making coaching decisions, right? And
as much as they would like to, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure they would love to, but that's not going to happen. I mean, it sort of maintains the foundation of the ownership construct, where the controlling owner has to own 30%, but also offers owners a liquidity opportunity so that they can reinvest in their businesses, reinvest in stadiums, reinvest in their clubs and their fan experiences and everything else like that. So it was important to get it right, I think, and I think there'll be points in time. We had we had 2 fund transactions at the end of the calendar year last year with Miami and with Buffalo, with 2 of our fund partners, with Arctos and Ares, and we'll see what happens next. I think it'll continue to evolve, but out of the gate, I think it was a really thoughtful, intentional construct that works for the NFL and then protects all the foundational parts of our policy that have made the league great.
What makes it such a good business for private equity to come into space right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I think, number one, it's finding the right partners. I think a lot of the time that the committee that we put together with the 5 owners spent a lot of time thinking about who are the right partners, because this isn't something, we have a 6-year hold period that's part of the policy, as you know. But this isn't something that I think we're going to see a lot of exit, right? I think what we will see is, you look at, and not just the NFL, but you look at the growth of franchise values. I mean, we saw it with the Boston Celtics sale. Candidly, we see it with our limited partner valuations, like the Philadelphia Eagles at the end of last year as well. This is something where I think, there's scarcity, right? There are only so many sports franchises. There are only 32 NFL teams, and people want to be the owners of those teams, so the scarcity value certainly helps. And then I think you look at the long-term growth and the impact that we have on society, on fandom, on engagement. I mean, there really is nothing like the NFL that unifies people in that way, and people want to be a part of it. And so I think that as you think about funds who are investing, I think they see that growth. Certainly we spend a lot of time thinking about the media landscape and the disruption and what are the things we need to do to continue to innovate and how is that going to affect our top line. But when you think about scarcity and you think about the impact, just sort of the power of the content in reaching so many people across the country, and again, hopefully across the globe at some point. I think that these funds come in and they see that long-term growth potential.
Correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you can't correct me if I am wrong, but NFL, one of the reasons they're the envy of sports around the world, is probably the only league at this scale that is not only growing top-line revenue, but also net earnings. And to be 32 for 32, or even close to that, is such an anomaly, because teams usually break even, they lose a little money, they make a little money, and they're fine, and they're ready to go to the next hole. NFL is truly the anomaly that grows both sides, top and net earnings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Last year, all 32 of our clubs were profitable, and I don't think other sports leagues can say that, but there's a real, as you think about top-line growth, and certainly you can make an argument that franchise valuations are based on that top-line growth, but there's profit growth as well. And we look at clubs' financials in sort of quartiles, the 4 quartiles split into eight clubs each. And, you see that fourth quartile, the gap between sort of the top 8 clubs and, the bottom 8 clubs from a financial perspective closing. And that's what you want to see. You want to see sort of the tide lifting all boats. And that is what we've seen. And that's a really, really strong, financial metric.
Wow, it's a really interesting point, too. And Alex, I know it's something you and I have talked about on this show, is how that is certainly not the case in all the leagues, and I'm thinking specifically of baseball, which is something that you've talked a lot about in terms of that the haves and the have-nots. The gap is widening, not shrinking, and that's a real issue for the growth of a league, no question. So when you think about those growth attributes, Christine, international, you mentioned this in passing, but let's dig in on it a little bit, is clearly an area where the NFL is keenly interested, and individual franchise owners and club owners are very interested in that as well. It's a pretty complicated system of, who has rights where and who's playing where. And I think people pay a lot of attention to who's doing what in which markets. Help us understand the strategy there. Like, how do you think about creating a system? Because we know that the NFL has been successful by being methodical. It does feel like you've been pretty aggressive internationally. Is that fair? Like, how would you characterize the international expansion?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I will say there's an enormous strategic focus on it. What do we need to be doing? How do we need to be thinking about growing fandom globally? What are the key priority markets, and really identifying where and how much money it's going to take to invest to grow that fandom? I mean, this coming season, we're going to play 7 international games. We'll play 3 in London. We're entering 3 new markets. We'll be in Dublin for the first time. We'll be in Madrid for the first time. And we'll be in Berlin for the first time. And then we'll return to Brazil. We played last year Eagles-Packers kickoff weekend in Brazil in Sao Paulo, and we'll return to Sao Paulo. And then we have our sights set on expansion beyond that. So we announced a multi-year deal to play in Australia starting in the 2026 season in Melbourne. So it is something we spend a ton of time thinking about how to get it right, how to be a global sports property, whether that's player academies and player development, whether that's a global markets program, and 29 of our 32 clubs participate in our global markets program. All of the things that you need to do to build that phantom, to get the rest of the world to know and to learn and to love the game as much as we do here.
And so, Christine, one of the things, when we talk about the globe, we can't help but think about the global economy. And it is really something right now, to say the least. And one of the things that has always been attractive about sports franchises for people is the sort of uncorrelated nature, to get very Bloombergy about it, of these assets over time. And yet, you're still talking about not just people tuning in, but people showing up, people buying merchandise. How much, as the CFO, do you have to keep an eye on sort of what's happening, forget geopolitically, but really just geoeconomically, as it relates to your business?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that question has come up a lot over the past couple of days, just as things evolve, and obviously you read the headlines and from our employees even, and we certainly have to keep an eye on it. I mean, there are aspects certainly of our business model that are contracted, and that's great, but we also want to recognize that most of our, about half of total league-wide revenue comes from our media deals, right? And we want our media partners feel the impact of a recession, if there were to be a recession, right? Because they're, advertising based, and in some cases during a recession, those are the first budgets to get cut. And so if our media partners feel it, we feel it. We want them to be successful. We want them to grow revenue. And so we think about it from a media partner aspect. And we also think about it through, discretionary spend, right? Fans going to games, that's a discretionary spend. And so, in a world where an economy is challenged or where there is a recession, that discretionary spend could be affected. And then I think finally we just think about it as it relates to the tariffs and what impact that could have as we think about international expansion and what we're doing internationally, and also stadium builds, stadium renovation and development, and the stadium builds and how that impacts the clubs who are spending money investing in their stadiums, whether it's a renovation or a new build as well. So I guess that's a long way of saying we keep a very close eye on it, and try to account for different scenarios in the financial planning we're doing as well.
All right, so now we're going to play a fun little game, which is let's talk about the draft from 3 different perspectives. First, my perspective, which is the least interesting, which is a fan of football. I root for the Atlanta Falcons. That's my hometown, so it's always interesting to see who they're going to draft, to say the least. Arthur Blank, we're with you. Do it right. Let's go. There's one person on this call right now who was drafted, and we're going to ask him about that perspective. And then, Christine, I want to ask you about the business of the draft. But, Alex, partner, come on in here. We are literally, amid the NFL draft. You weren't drafted to play football, though, I don't know, maybe you could have been. You were drafted to play baseball. What's it like to be drafted?
Well, the NFL did have an impact because Dan Marino was my favorite football player, of course, growing up here in Miami. And he was like the greatest, coolest thing in the world. As a matter of fact, I met Dan as a 15-year-old. He's put his arm around me and he said, you're going to make it big one day. And now we're great friends. And it was just a really nice story that makes me feel good. And we bonded over 13. But as far as the draft, I'll never forget. It was June of 1993. My mom comes from very humble background, so I had an opportunity to have my dream come true. I was drafted by the Mariners. I was going to play with the Michael Jordan of baseball, which was Ken Griffey Jr., and it was a life-changing experience, and it was when my journey began, and it's a day I'll never forget.
And so, Christine, you were a fantastic lacrosse player at Villanova, but there was no professional lacrosse league at that point. I'm sure you would have made it. Our friend Paul Rabel who's been a guest on this program, now is making that right, and there is a women's professional league, but there wasn't at the time. And yet now you oversee and help oversee with Roger Goodell and others, this unbelievable event. I mean, the ratings for which are through the roof. It's this unbelievable sort of moment, nowhere near the NFL season where everybody's talking about the NFL. So what is it like for the business of the NFL to have the draft be this big of a deal?
Oh, it's huge. And it's interesting to me. I had never been to an NFL draft before I started in this role, and I went out to Detroit last year and was just absolutely blown away by you think about the NFL being in the off season, right? The off season. And hundreds of thousands of fans hyped up, excited, wearing their jerseys, just ready to go. There's no game, right? And it really does speak to, long before my time at the NFL's ability to really eventize and, really keep that engagement with fans throughout the calendar year, all 12 months, right? You think about the draft, the combine, the schedule release in May, the start of training camp. I mean, it's just year-round continuing to grow and develop that excitement. And then from a business perspective, as I've looked back and sort of studied the economics of it, the draft used to be, up until 2014, I believe, it was a local event done at a Radio City Music Hall, and now it is a full city takeover with hundreds. I mean, every year it's breaking records in terms of attendance. I think Green Bay this year will be the ninth new market that the draft has gone into since it left Radio City in 2015. Which is pretty incredible. And we have over half the teams have expressed interest in hosting a draft. I mean, there's just tremendous interest, and and there's all sorts of correlations. I think as you think about, I've heard the draft in Nashville in 2019 was a real turning point. You saw, all kinds of NFL fans up and down Broadway. And that was something that helped lead to public funding in the stadium development in Nashville.
Wow.
So there's all sorts of correlations that are positive from a business perspective. And, it's just, you spoke about the ratings. I mean, the viewership is off the charts. It beats the finals of some other sports leagues. So it really is incredible in terms of the power of engaging with an audience, engaging with fans when you're not in season, and really continuing that sort of thread throughout the off season.
By the way, the owner of an NBA and WNBA team is shaking his head at that very statistic, Christine. But go on.
Yeah, we all envy the NFL, that's for sure. But, Christine, all of the business metrics we've been talking about over the last 20 or 25 minutes have been under the leadership of Commissioner Roger Goodell. And he's been great with me personally. But I'm wondering, from your point of view, you've been there about 2 years, what do you see as his superpower? And in such a short time, what are some of the lessons you've learned from him that make him tick? Because the NFL has been up and to the right for a very long time under his leadership.
Yeah, no, tremendous. And look, I mean, my understanding is Roger started as an intern at the NFL. And so he knows the place inside and out for sure. But I think his superpower is he's restless, right? He never grows complacent. It is always, let's celebrate the wins. But let's look at what's next. Let's look at how we can do better. Let's look at how we can innovate. Let's look at what can we learn from. We have tremendous partners. I mean, one of the things that was just so incredible to me when I started as CFO was the companies that want to work with the NFL. And it just it's phenomenal. And so what can we learn from them? He is always learning, thinking, innovating, and looking ahead to what's next and how we can raise the bar. And look, if you're a fan, if you're a player, if you're a coach, if you're a general manager, if you're an owner, if you're a media partner, that's what you want.
All right, Christine, we're going to get to our rapid fire segment in a second. But before we do that, we've sort of nodded to some of your background and, Villanova, and you talked a lot about your experience at NBC. One, I think, very notable thing is your time, in the Army, in Army intelligence. How does that sort of experience play into a job like that? Certainly, I would imagine it gives you some perspective and gives you a sense of what ultimately is important in defending our country, versus a football game, which we all love to watch. But, what's the perspective you bring, or are there certain skills or attributes that you find yourself sort of going back to from those early days?
Yeah, no question. It was incredibly foundational for me. I wouldn't trade my experience in the Army for anything. I feel very fortunate to have served and to have served alongside some really phenomenal human beings where service is front and center for them, and I learned a ton from them. I mean, the things I learned that were foundational for me that I still apply at this day, it's the grit and resilience. You can learn that from sports. You can learn that from a lot of different places, but when you see it in action, particularly when you're overseas and you see people away from soldiers, away from their families, and the way they dig deep and find that grit and resilience within them it was just phenomenal. And I learned that. I learned it by watching people I served with, and I learned it myself. And then I think the ability to learn and adapt, to really listen. When I was a 22-year-old platoon leader in charge of people who had far more years of experience than I did, and you're not successful unless you listen and you learn and you're patient and you're thoughtful and you learn an appreciation for what other people do and figure out how you can help support them as a leader. So all of those skills. I mean, it was a short, in the scheme of a career, it was a very short time. But at the same time, I draw on those lessons every day.
All right. Well, we're going to move to the rapid fire portion of the conversation, the lightning round. 5 questions. Keep it tight. We're going to bounce it back and forth. I'll start, and then Alex will pick up. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received on deal making or business?
I think always do something you're a little not ready to do. Those nervous butterflies and prepare, but also be willing to take a risk.
Who's your dream deal-making partner?
You know what? I got to say my father. He's retired now, spent a long career in finance, but has now become a historian. He wrote a book on sort of the lessons you can learn from history and how to apply them to the business world. He's patient, he's thoughtful, and he's just a super smart person, and he would be my dream deal maker.
What's the name of the book?
Battlefield Lessons to Business Bullets. It's a great book. It's short, but a lot of application there.
And what's your dad's name?
His name's Jerry McNeff.
Okay, all right.
There you
go. On the reading list now.
There you go.
What's the most nervous you've ever been?
I would say jumping out of an airplane when I was in the military.
That's number one for us.
Haven't been more nervous than that.
Yeah, say less.
Even day one working for Roger Goodell, I was still more nervous jumping out of a plane.
I've never felt so unaccomplished. All right, here we go. Number 4. What's your hype song before you go into a big meeting or negotiation?
Well, I'm a Philly girl, so it's got to be "Gonna Fly Now," the Rocky song.
Yeah. Love it. All right, what's your advice for someone listening who wants a career like yours?
I think figure out a way to show that grit, show that resilience, show that determination, and just figure out a way to lose without being defeated. You're not going to get your dream job day one. You're going to take twists and turns, but figure out a way to learn from the losses and not get defeated and keep plugging away.
Christine, it's been really fun to get to know you off camera and on this show. We really appreciate your time. We know it's a super busy time of year because the NFL never sleeps, man. We know
Never
that, Alex.
sleep.
So
no, it's great.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.